Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. Today is me, Jeff Black, joined by, as always, the ever most handsome Brandon DeCruz. Today, we're going to go over episode 112. Wow, to think 112 of these already.
Crazy.
I know, but spot reduction. Is it possible to lose belly fat in specific areas? This is a very common question that I think every coach has gotten. And I think every general population, normie person, everyone in between really doesn't know, doesn't really understand, or lack of a lot of reasons for, the confusion out there. So today we thought we'd take a stab at it and go from there. The only thing that I want to say on my end is we do have the Joe Jeffries seminar, which Brandon and I are good friends with Joe. He's coming over from England. It'll be here in Nashville, Tennessee. It'll be the last Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So the ticket's only going to be $300 and you get 3 days. Friday and Saturday will be lecture off site. Sunday will be a group workout together where, you'll be able to kind of be able to work out, look at stuff. They'll probably go over exercises. Joe and I are planning it, but it's going to be a great time. They're great people. And it's always good to get a different lens. Now, this is high level stuff that he is going to be talking about. I do not mince my words. Those are the seminars I like to bring. Those are the coaches I like to network with and interact. So if you're a coach and you train, hard gen pop people, weekend warriors, I guess what we call them, and bodybuilders or anything, who are really elite, this is going to be a seminar that you won't want to miss. But with that being said, look for that to go on sale soon. I will be giving away one free ticket and covering your time here in Nashville, Tennessee. If you leave us a great review on iTunes for Chasing Clarity Podcast, rate us on Spotify, and make sure you don't miss a week from now when Joe comes in town of sharing our podcast and praising how beautiful and beautiful I am, because this beard is amazing. So with that being said, let's get into it. Spot reduction. Is it possible to lose body fat in specific areas? So let's get into this, Brandon. Like, what is spot reduction? Kind of like, for me, it's always like, hey, I just want to lose my belly and I just want to gain in my butt, or I want to, lose on my chest and gain it in my arms, or all these different things people think, but let's kind of go over it with them, man.
Absolutely. So I think this is going to be a really timely topic because you and I right now, we're ahead of game in terms of episodes. But by the time that this gets released, it will be already the end of May and we'll be very quickly approaching summer. And so really with summer approaching, I know that many of you out there have the goal of fat loss on your minds. So seeing as we just went over, so when you guys are listening to this episode, we would have already recorded and released an episode that dove deep into the science of stubborn body fat. So that was going to be episode 111. And so this week I wanted to cover the topic of body fat spot reduction, which is a topic, as Jeff you mentioned, many wonder about and have asked me about over the years. And so spot reduction, just so you guys get a definition of this, is the theory that we can lose body fat in specific areas using specific approaches to training and exercise. And often this includes doing some targeted exercises or targeted training for specific regions to help improve the look of this area or the body part, and then also to lose or to encourage fat loss in that specific region. And so one of the most common questions I've received from clients over the years is how do we get rid of X, area of a body fat? So when I was personally training back in the day, 2010 to like 2013, I had a lot of women that were in that perimenopause or especially postmenopausal phase. And they would always, tell me about their triceps. And so they wanted to lose, fat in that specific area. But for many of you out there, it'll probably be, I'll tell you what I encounter most often is a lot of times people want to lose fat in their low abs, their low abdominal section, their trunk region, their low back. And then there's others that want to lose fat specifically in their arms. Now, to give you all a little background on the topic of spot reduction, this is a topic that researchers, coaches, and fitness professionals have argued back and forth about for many years as to whether it can occur and is it even possible. And so if we go back, say, a decade ago, when I was first getting into coaching, Jeff was in the scene already. Most of the research that we had on this topic did not find spot reduction to occur from the protocols and the interventions that they tested. So if you were to ask most people in the fitness industry, even today, if spot reduction is real and possible, they'll tell you no. So I do want to give you guys just an advance warning about that because you may listen to this and then realize, oh, maybe what I've been told is incorrect, or it challenges what you've been how you've been educated by other fitness professionals. And we're going to go into this, why that is. but there's been more recent evidence that has alluded to the fact or elucidated the fact that spot reduction may be possible. And so we'll get into that. But if you would honestly, and I want to be transparent about this because I try to be open minded, not so open that my brain's going to fall out, but open enough that I'm always open to new information, new research, and I'm constantly digging into different topics. And so oftentimes you guys will hear that my stances on different concepts or methods or even just topics will change over the years and they'll evolve. And I think that that's a good sign of someone that's evolving and that's developing over their career. So I want you guys to realize that this is something that I had a different opinion of if you just asked me a few years ago. So any clients out there, there's been times that you've asked me many years ago, hey, does spot reduction exist? And I probably told you it didn't. And so if you had asked me, just say a few years ago, spot reduction was possible, and if you could just train your abs enough to essentially sit up your way to a slimmer stomach, I would have said no. But that's because I don't believe a single approach in isolation, like adding sit-ups to your program, would be able to elicit targeted fat loss, as in order to lose body fat, you need to be able to liberate fat from an area to be burned off for energy, and you also need to consistently maintain a calorie deficit to be able to keep that fat off and prevent fat from being restored again in that area. However, I have been open to the idea that we may be able to lose body fat preferentially from certain areas if we combine multiple approaches such as direct training, cardio, diet modifications, and supplementation. So when people would ask me about spot reduction in the context of, can I just do sit-ups? Is that going to make my abs show through better? Not from a muscularity standpoint, but just from a fat loss perspective. I would have told you no, and honestly, I'm still staying consistent with that because as we'll get into the methodology of the most recent literature on this, you'll see that it's multimodal approaches that are eliciting spot reduction. So I was on the fence about spot reduction up until about a month or so ago. And I had a client of mine named Grant. So, shout out to Grant, a long-term client of mine. And he asked me about spot reduction. And I decided to dive back into the literature on this topic as I had been, it had been a few years since I had really dug into it because I hadn't seen anything come out that was recent. And so right now I'm currently taking Grant through a photo shoot prep to get him into his best shape of his life for his 50th birthday. Right now, at this point, we are currently 9 weeks into this phase, and his body composition has completely transformed from where it was when we started this phase. And so right now, he's just about as lean as he was at the end of our last fat loss phase last year, which was about a year ago. But his goal since the start of this phase was to beat last year's look and to bring his best physique to these upcoming photo shoots that he has planned in the lead up into his 50th birthday, because this is a milestone birthday for him. So he really wants to look his best. And so in one of his recent check-ins from about a month ago, he mentioned how he's noticed that as he's gotten older, and I'm sure you guys can relate to this, anyone that's in their 40s or 50s, he's noticed that his trunk and his midsection tend to hold more body fat, and they're more difficult to lose fat from than they were previously, when he was in his 30s or he was in his 20s. And it's something he's been self-conscious about. And this got us into discussion on spot reduction. Now, one thing about my coaching style is I'm very solution-oriented. So if a client has a problem, I want to help solve it. And that's often why I've dug so deep into different topics ranging from nutrition to training to health-related topics over the years, as I'm most driven to research topics that are problems I'm encountering with either myself or the clients that I work with one-on-one. And so when I encounter an issue like this, I try to dig deep into a topic and synthesize the best available and up-to-date literature on that topic so that I can test new methods in my coaching practice. I can assess how it is or isn't working, and then I can take the strategies that have been the most effective in practice and I can add them to my toolbox. So this episode has come about from something I've been digging into and working on with my client Grant over the last month. When I dug back into the topic and I found that there was some more recent literature that I was unaware of that finds that spot reduction may be possible in certain, situations and circumstances. So that's what we're going to cover today.
Do you want to get anything more about theories behind spot reduction, or do you want to go into the recent research? I will say that I don't. For me, I've actually had a harder time with body fat in my upper back as I've gotten older, like in weirder places where I actually have managed to stay leaner on my lower back. So it's interesting. But I do agree overall, you do see that with men and women where they're, women will gain in their belly and lose it in their butt as they go through menopause.
Absolutely.
Men will kind of do a similar belly thing with visceral. So where you want to go with it, a little bit more on the theory behind spot reduction, kind of break it down a little bit deeper, get into the research.
Absolutely. I think it is important to understand the theory behind spot reduction and some of the mechanisms that are going on or that are underlying that fat loss physiology essentially. Because on last week's podcast, I went through the entire chain of events, the three-step process that it takes to essentially liberate mobilize body fat, transport it, and oxidize it or burn it for energy. But this is a little bit different in terms of what we're looking to do with the intention. And this also explains why some literature in the past or some studies in the past have not seen spot reduction. So the theory behind spot reduction is that we may be able to use targeted exercise to stimulate fat loss in a local area of fat that's near the muscles we're contracting during that exercise. So meaning, if you are looking to lose body fat in your arms, you would have to train your arms directly to be able to increase lipolysis in that area. You're not going to, be able to initiate spot reduction in an area you don't train. And so, as we just discussed in last week's podcast, one of the reasons why it's harder to lose fat from areas like our low stomach, our low back, our hips and thighs is because they have poorer blood flow than other regions. In order to lose fat from an area, we need sufficient blood flow so that we can transport fatty acids from the fat cells in that area to our muscles to be burned off for energy. Now, the issue is that there are certain regions of the body that regularly have poor blood flow, and this includes regions that you'll notice are more stubborn. So this is our abs, our low back, our hips, our thighs, and they also tend to be areas that people neglect to train. However, if we can increase blood flow in these areas, we may be able to lose more fat from them. So one method that has been shown to increase blood flow to an area is to directly train it. So when we look at exercise and the effects that it has on blood flow, we see that exercise in and of itself increases blood flow, which can increase lipolysis, aka fat breakdown. So for example, when we look at aerobic training, which would just be cardio, it increases whole body lipolysis from fat tissue, meaning we break down and utilize fatty acids from different regions of our body when doing low intensity cardio. Research has also found that we can increase blood flow in subcutaneous fat tissue and increase lipolysis, meaning we can increase fat breakdown in fat regions next to contracting muscles more than we can from fat regions that are next to muscles that are not being trained and worked. And so, for example, in a 2007 study, they wanted to see if resistance training a specific muscle could increase blood flow and lipolysis in the subcutaneous fat, which is the jiggly fat essentially, near the trained muscle that they were looking at. So they put individuals through a one-legged training protocol where they just had them train one leg in isolation, whereas the other leg was not being trained. And then they made several measurements. And so what they found was that blood flow and lipolysis were higher in the fat tissue near the leg that was being trained. So in the unilateral design, only the leg that was actually going through muscular contractions and being loaded saw an increase in blood flow and lipolysis as compared to the fat tissue in the same, in the next leg that was not being trained and that was essentially resting. We can also increase the amount of fat we break down, mobilize, and burn when we do resistance training followed by aerobic training. So if you were to take and you were to do a resistance training session at a higher intensity, and then you follow it up by cardio after that session, you will burn more fat than you would if you just did the resistance training session by itself. And so if you do a resistance training session and it's at a higher intensity, so you're training close to failure, you're really pushing yourself. You will burn more fat when you do cardio after that session because high intensity activities like resistance training increase catecholamine production. And catecholamines are those hormones like noradrenaline and adrenaline, or norepinephrine and epinephrine, same thing, that help to break down fat. But when we look at the different modalities, like resistance training, it's an anaerobic activity, so it relies off of glucose metabolism. It relies off of carbohydrates. However, when we do steady state cardio, that relies off fatty acids for fuel. So if you mobilize fat in your training session doing resistance training, you can then burn those fatty acids off with doing cardio after. So this is where we're looking at multimodal activities. We're looking at a combination between resistance training and cardio. So in order to maximize these effects, you'd want to train muscle groups that you want to lose fat in. And then on the days you train those body parts, you'd want to do cardio after those sessions to take advantage of the fact that you broke down fat from those body parts that you can then burn off for energy during cardio. So this is where I'm trying to give you guys the theory or some of the mechanisms behind spot reduction, because it's going to give you a better understanding, first and foremost, how to initiate it or how to potentially, practically apply it in your own life. But the other reason is, if you were to go back through some of the studies, and there's many from the 60s, 70s, and up until the early 2000s that try to do spot reduction protocols, or they try to test, does spot reduction exist, or is it possible? And a lot of times it was doing only one type of training. So for instance, there was like a sit-up study that they did where they did progressive sit-up training. So essentially what they did was they brought people into a lab, and every week they would do essentially a ascending sit-up protocol where they would do more and more. So it's kind of like progressive overload of sit-ups. So they start with one number and then build up over time across the course of a study. But two issues with that. It was just sit-ups, which have a very low energy expenditure, especially body weight sit-ups. Diet was not controlled. So for instance, if people were compensating after, you're not going to burn body fat if you're at maintenance or if you're in a surplus of energy. And there was nothing else in conjunction with that core training protocol. So there was no cardio to increase energy expenditure or to burn off those fatty acids. So this is where understanding the theory can help you understand some of the recent research that we're going to go through next.
All right. So, what is some of that recent research that's found a spot reduction to occur? Is it recent? Is it been around for a while? I know sometimes with research you can find things from like the 1950s. So, and then sometimes like, holy shit, it was right all along. You know what I mean? So, curious, like, how new is it, B, for you to change your mind recently within the last 30 days or so, or 3 months, whatever it was?
Yeah, so I'll be honest with you. One of the studies is from 2017, and I just wasn't aware of it. I hadn't looked into it, and maybe I had come across it at one point, but it was one study in isolation, and I never take one study to be the end all be all. I'm always looking at the body of literature. So it wasn't until a very recent study that was actually published at the end of 2023 came out, and I just recently stumbled upon it. So this study has been around maybe 4 months in Ether, and so once I read that, I started looking back through some of the literature, and there was research from 2017 that corroborates the findings of this recent 2023 study. So there are two recent studies that have found spot reduction to occur, but it's been in very specific cases. And what I mean by that is they did both direct resistance training for a body part and cardio. And so they combined both of these modalities, whereas a lot of the previous research on spot reduction just had participants do a bunch of crunches or just did cardio by itself, and they kept the same diet. And in those studies, they did not see a significant degree of spot reduction. So the first study we're going to look into is entitled The Effect of Combined Resistance and Endurance Exercise Training on Regional Fat Loss. And so in this study, they took physically inactive women and they divided them into two groups. Now, one group resistance trained only their upper body each session. And then after every single upper body session, they would do 30 minutes of cycling. So they did a resistance training session for their upper body, followed by a low intensity steady state cardio session. The other group resistance trained only their lower body. And it's important to realize there was a upper body resistance training only group and a lower body resistance training only group. And in the lower body resistance training only group, they did a 30-minute rather cardio session on the arm ergometer after each of the resistance training sessions. So each group trained the same amount of days per week and trained using the same exact training volume each session. So what they do is they would do 5 exercises for 3 sets of 10 for 8 weeks. That was the duration of the study. And they were told to maintain their normal diet so that the only difference between groups is that they trained only their upper body or only their lower body, depending on what group they were put into, and then followed those sessions up with a 30-minute cardio session. Now, at the end of this program, they found that both groups lost the same amount of body weight. However, both groups lost fat preferentially from different regions when we compare one to the other. So, for instance, the group that trained only their upper body lost more fat from their arms than they did from their legs. So they trained their upper body, they lost more body fat from their arms. And they also gained a bit more lean mass in their upper body. Now, on the opposite side, or on the other hand, the lower body group lost more fat mass from their legs, so the body parts that they were training, than they did from their arms, and they saw a significant increase in lower body lean mass. And these changes in fat mass and lean mass were measured via DEXA, but they also took skin folds before and after this study. And what they found was that the upper body group saw a decrease or a greater decrease in tricep skin fold thickness than the lower body group. But the lower body group saw a greater decrease in thigh skin fold thickness. So this indicates that the upper body group did in fact lose fat mass from their arms, and the lower body group lost fat mass from their thighs. So both groups experienced body recomposition, meaning they had a loss of fat mass and an increase in lean mass at the same time. But it's important to realize that it was specific to the areas they trained. So that the group that trained upper body lost fat and gained muscle in their upper body, and the group that trained lower body lost fat and gained muscle in their lower body. And this may be due to the fact that during resistance training, they mobilized more fat from the regions they trained. But after the training sessions, they had already increased blood flow to those areas, and they had liberated free fatty acids from those areas they trained. So by doing cardio immediately after, these fatty acids weren't able to be stored again, and instead they were burned off for energy. Now, the newest study I found on this topic was released at the end of 2023 and has a quite revealing and telling title. So I'm going to read it out to you guys. This study was entitled Abdominal Aerobic Endurance Exercises Reveal Spot Reduction Exists, a randomized controlled trial. In the study, they took overweight males. So in the last study, it was all overweight females. In this study, it is overweight males who were an average of 43 years old, and they split them up into two groups. One group did cardio plus direct ab training 4 times per week. So they did both aerobic and resistance training specifically for the abs. It's important to realize that this entire podcast, I've been mentioning the fact that these are combination type approaches to spot reduction, because you're going to see within the context of this study that it does make a really big difference. And so in the cardio plus direct ab training group, what they did was each session, they started with 27 minutes of treadmill running, followed by ab training. However, this wasn't just your normal ab training like you're going through the motions. This was a pretty intense ab training routine. So first, they started with 4 sets of 4-minute intervals on the torso rotation machine, which they actually loaded. So this was progressive in nature throughout the entire course of the study. After those 4 sets of 4-minute intervals on the torso rotation machine, they followed it up with 4 sets of 4-minute intervals on the ab crunch machine. So each of these sessions took the individuals between the cardio and their, or their resistance training sessions for their abs. It took them 84 minutes to complete, including resting periods. So this was quite a time-consuming process. Now, another group acted as the control, and what they did was they did treadmill running for 45 minutes 4 times per week. And this amount of cardio was selected to ensure that both groups burned the same amount of calories per session, so that there was no differences between the energy expenditures of the two groups, because we want to see in isolation, does training your abs in conjunction with doing cardio actually elicit spot reduction, or can we get the same fat loss or same spot reduction from just doing cardio by itself? So each group trained 4 days per week, and each group had their energy expenditure, aka the calories burned, matched between sessions and per week, which is important because if we're looking at fat loss differences between groups, we need to ensure that the deficit between both groups is matched and maintained. So at the end of 10 weeks, their local fat mass was measured by DEXA. And what they found was both groups lost body weight and fat mass. Now, with the cardio group, the cardio group only lost more total body weight. However, the cardio plus ab training group lost more total fat mass, meaning they retained more lean body mass. So the cardio plus ab training group lost a significant amount of trunk fat mass, meaning from the trunk region, the abdominal region, whereas the cardio only group did not lose any fat mass from their trunk. And this led the researchers to conclude abdominal endurance exercise utilized more local fat than treadmill running, indicating that spot reduction exists in adult males. So both of these studies' findings suggest that in very specific circumstances, spot reduction may be possible. However, it's important to realize that the most recent research we have on this topic finds that it takes a combination of resistance training and cardio to preferentially lose in the areas that were trained before or after doing low intensity cardio. So this is not that if you're not doing a combination of resistance training for a specific body part and doing cardio, that you're going to get spot reduction from just doing one or the other. So this is not something you can elicit from just doing resistance training or just doing abdominal training or just doing cardio. It needs to be a multifactorial approach where you're going to be hitting different, essentially pulling different levers to initiate and allow this to happen.
Okay, so then I have a question for you. Did they use this to be something? How do they control the diet part of it? And then two, were there any supplements or anything used with this that they did?
So they had diet logs for both of these studies. They had them stay at maintenance calories. And so essentially with the secondary study, they matched the energy expenditure between groups. And how they did that was actually they did a pilot trial beforehand. And what they wanted to see was how much calories does this ab training protocol burn? And so they found that I believe it was approximately, now this is a secondary, this was really deep in the supplementary files. I want to say that the ab training routine that they had them do burned 40% of the calories that a 45-minute session of running did. So their cardio group. And so what they did was they backfilled that with cardio. And so if you see in the intervention, they have the group start with 27 minutes of cardio plus, this very long duration of ab training. And that was to make sure that their energy expenditure or the amount of calories they burned were sustained so that both groups were in the same, they had the same amount of energy expenditure and the same deficit, which is why both groups lost a significant amount of body weight. But we see that the body composition outcomes are different because essentially the group that was training their abs lost more total fat mass and lost less lean mass throughout that deficit that they had created because they were actually stimulating muscle tissue, and they were also losing fat preferentially from their abdominal region due to the fact that they had trained.
Okay, that actually is really well put together. I mean, actually, I think I'm impressed because I know you've talked a lot on research studies, and often you will start shooting holes in things. Like it's very funny to watch you do that because I'm your friend and I giggle when I'm high and you do it. But the way that this one sounds like it was a really good one. So I think
I'll be honest with you. This is the between this study and the 2017 study, these are the best and most well put together, for this specific genre of studies that are done on spot reduction. And I think that that's what has really allowed me to open up my mind. And because I dug through all these in quite detail, that it caused me to take a step back and say, all right, there's all this literature, and I've read into it years ago on why spot reduction doesn't exist, but there are a lot of holes and limitations in those studies. Lack of dietary control, only
right.
one modality of training. Some of them are just doing cardio to see if there's spot reduction. And we know that cardio in and of itself is great for whole body lipolysis, but really you're not going to see, a specific region being burned during cardio. Same thing with doing crunches. It's not an activity. So for instance, if we look at like this last study, this 2023 study, did a pilot trial to see how many calories are burned during a very long and arduous session of abdominal training. So essentially what they did was it was 84 minutes between the cardio and the actual the cardio session and the ab training. So we're talking about over 50 minutes of ab training because their full sessions were 84 minutes. Now that is a very long and arduous and lengthy ab training, but they saw that they were able to get the same energy expenditure from doing a 45-minute session of cardio. So essentially, if we look at it, the cardio group only did about half the total time in the gym than the ab training plus the cardio group, because the ab training plus the cardio group took 84 minutes per session. The cardio only group that acted as the control did 45 minutes per session. So if we're only to look at ab training in and of itself and you're trying to create a substantial deficit from it, it's just not an effective method, especially because it is something that if we think about resistance training, even resistance training in and of itself only burns a couple hundred calories. It is the afterburn effect in terms of EPOC and also the increase in your resting metabolic rate and your energy expenditure from stimulating muscle protein synthesis and also building muscle that really gives us this massive benefit from a long-term perspective on increasing total daily energy expenditure from building muscle and engaging in resistance training. Ab training in and of itself is not going to build that much muscle, not going to burn that many calories. So
Yep.
for those other studies that we go back, even to the 60s were the initial studies, I believe, a lot of them, they just weren't designed well enough where they should have initiated spot reduction. And that kind of closed the book for many people in their mind saying, all right, we have, say, 5 to 10 studies that show that spot reduction doesn't exist. But I think, and that's where my mind is open to, where the fact that, all right, let's combine resistance training for a particular muscle group. Let's combine cardio. A lot of these actual spot reduction studies do not elicit or do not induce a calorie deficit. So with my clients, I'm inducing a calorie deficit on top of it. Then I'm utilizing specific fat loss supplements. We do not have literature that looks at all of those multimodal approaches to spot reduction. And the reason for that is because science is about the scientific method. Let's integrate or implement one variable in isolation and track the changes. Because if we were to say include a calorie deficit, specific training for an exercise or for a region, plus cardio, plus dietary interventions, plus supplementation, it's like if we got a really good effect, we couldn't say in isolation, it was because of this. It was because I use yohimbine hydrochloride. It was because I use Vasoburn. It was because of the calorie deficit that I induced. We wouldn't be able to isolate things. And that's what research is looking to do. It's looking to be able to push us more in direction and kind of show us a direction to head in to get better answers. But it's not telling us exactly what to do within our training programs. And this is where evidence-based practice really comes in. Evidence-based practice is not just my interpretation of the research or looking into the best available research. It's taking that and being able to synthesize a very large body of literature, which is why I'm always open to changing my mind or taking on new information. So that's the first bucket of essentially the triangle of evidence-based practice. The second is the experiences and the expertise and the knowledge of the practitioner, myself as a coach, seeing this in practice, working with it through, right now I'm working through it with Ray. And then it's the preferences, the abilities, the capabilities, and the interests of the client that you're working with. So in this specific use case, my guy wanted to lose body fat in his low back and his low stomach. I'm on it. I'm a problem or a solution oriented coach. I really want to help him with this. So I took the time and I dove into it, and I can't wait to send this to him. So, this is just really being able to take literature and not letting it just like be black or white and really tell you what you should do in practice, but really being able to assimilate information and disseminate it out so that people better understand some of these concepts.
Okay, so then how can we apply this information practically? I'm sure there's best standards practice in terms of how you approach it. It drives me mad when I see people do cardio before their weights and certain things like that. I'm sure we could get into some good ideas to get people, on the way with some spot reduction.
Mm-hmm. So I want to wrap up this episode by going through some practical applications as to how we can use this information and what the recent literature suggests could help with losing stubborn body fat in a specific area. First, you're going to want to engage in regular resistance training throughout the week, and you want to make sure that you train the muscles you want to lose stubborn fat in. I think this is where many go wrong, as I know a lot of individuals who want to lose fat in a certain area or they want to tighten up and tone a specific area of their body, but they don't actually train that area. And so really it makes no sense that they're kind of going against or doing something that isn't conducive for the goal that they have. And I'll give you a situation about this. One situation I've encountered a ton of times over the years with some of the women that I've coached is I've had women who come to me and they wanted to lose fat from their arms. And usually it's specifically fat from their triceps. But at the same time, they haven't been training their arms and they don't want to because they fear that their arms are going to get bulkier if they train with weights. First and foremost, first of all, building muscle is both a challenging and a slow process. So for any of you out there who fear that you're going to get bulky by lifting weights, it's not going to happen for the vast majority, to be honest. And muscle growth is a slow process. So it's not like you're going to start training your arms and notice that they blow up overnight. What will happen is if you train a muscle group that you haven't trained before, you will see that muscle group get a pump, which is an increase in cellular swelling, which causes a temporary expansion and swelling of the muscles you've trained. And also, when you train a muscle and provide it with a sufficient training stimulus, it can also experience edema, or essentially with water retention and inflammation, which, the edema aspect is essentially training-induced inflammation, which will make that area look larger, but this is a temporary phenomenon. However, if you have a body part you want to improve the appearance of, one of the best ways to do so is to resistance train that area so that you can build lean mass and then combine it with a calorie-controlled diet so that you can recomp and build muscle while losing body fat, which is going to make you look leaner, more muscular, and give you a tighter appearance to all of your muscles. And you want to make sure you're training muscle groups you want or you wish to lose fat in, because by training that muscle group, you're going to increase blood flow to that muscle and also increase lipolysis, which is essentially the process of fat breakdown in the subcutaneous fat that's near the area of the working muscle that you're actually training. Now, after you mobilize fats from this fat tissue, it can either be burned for energy or it can be restored in that fat tissue. Now, the reason we most likely won't be able to burn enough of the mobilized fats through resistance training itself is because resistance training is a high intensity form of exercise, which burns mostly glucose for energy, and it also doesn't burn as many calories per minute and per session as cardio does. So low intensity steady state cardio, on the other hand, burns more calories per minute than resistance training does, and it also relies on fatty acids for fuel. So by doing cardio right after your resistance training sessions, we can burn off the mobilized fatty acids that you essentially liberated during your resistance training before they get reesterified back in the fat tissue. And reesterification is just the process of restoring fat back into fat tissue. So we want to avoid that. And so if you then, after that, so you essentially do resistance training, you follow it up by cardio, and then you make sure to maintain a consistent calorie deficit while combining this resistance training and cardio on a consistent basis, you'll be in a state of negative energy balance where you'll be losing fat consistently and not restoring or regaining fat in the process. And this will allow you to continue improving your physique over time. Now, I do want to be transparent about the fact that the literature on spot reduction is mixed, as I mentioned many times in this podcast. And in most of the earlier studies on this topic, they found no significant degree of body fat spot reduction, but that may have been due to poorly designed studies or even dietary reasons. As in most of those early studies, diet wasn't controlled or even accounted for. And if someone in that study was following the program but eating in a surplus, we can't expect them to lose or to see spot reduction from those studies. However, some of the more recent research we do have finds that spot reduction does occur in certain and specific circumstances where resistance training is paired with cardio. So if you're capable of inducing spot reduction, this would be the most likely way to achieve it. And I can also say from a personal experience, having worked with so many clients at this point and working with individuals ranging from, physique competitors to fitness professionals, to even lifestyle clients, I've noticed anecdotally that clients who I have do resistance training, steady state cardio, and steps during fat loss phases where I dial in their diets, they tend to lose fat more effectively as I'm pulling multiple levers to create and sustain a calorie deficit. So I'm doing it both through dietary means and then also increasing energy expenditure through exercise and physical activity. And it's often the clients I had that are most consistent with their diet, their training, their cardio, and they go the extra mile by including things like fasted and post workout cardio, who seem to struggle the least with stubborn body fat, and they get the leanest. And that may be due to the fact that how I'm having them approach their fat loss phases is optimizing all these conditions so that they're able to lose fat all around and are less likely to have trouble losing body fat as compared to others who may only be taking one or two of these approaches, such as those who only manipulate their diet when they're trying to lose body fat, or they're only doing cardio, or they're only, engaging in resistance training, or just trying to create the entire deficit from diet alone. So there's a lot of people that they have the goal of losing fat, but they're not taking the best and most effective approach. And we've spoken about that on many episodes of the podcast where we've discussed the most effective way to create a deficit. And if you go back to that podcast series, which this was close to a year ago that we went through all of that, I essentially went through the dietary modifications that need to be made. I went through the resistance training modifications that need to be made. I went through the cardio advantages or the modalities that we can use for cardio, and then also physical activity needs, steps. This is a multifaceted approach to maximizing fat loss and maintaining muscle tissue. And this is really how we're able to make sure that we get the best bang for our buck in terms of the best results possible for the work we're putting in. We're never relying on just one method, because that is often a very narrow-minded viewpoint or approach to a goal that is very challenging for many. And I'll tell you personally, a lot of the clients that I've had struggle the least with stubborn body fat or with areas that they're unhappy with are those that A, get leanest, B, are most consistent, and C, they're willing to try different modalities. So they're not someone that believes in they only can do resistance training and that cardio kills your gains, or it's not someone that's just a cardio bunny and refuses to resistance train in a progressive manner. It's not someone that just wants to do boot camp classes. These are people that have opened up their minds. These are clients that have taken on board a lot of these strategies and methods that I've come to them with and the rationale for them, and they've seen benefits from them. So it really is taking a more balanced approach to this body composition maximization process. So overall, I hope that you guys found, this episode and the topic to be interesting. And also, I think it's going to provide some rationale to my own clients why I often implement very specific methods in their own programming, especially when their goal is to lose body fat and build or maintain muscle, because there's a lot of times that I'm pulling different vectors and I may take a different approach than many coaches do. And I often try to provide, a better understanding, and I try to empower them with education. But I think that I know that some of my clients are going to listen to this with certain things that I've included into their program, and they're going to say, "Oh, wow, that's why he's done that, and that's why I'm seeing the results I am." So, overall, I think spot reduction, I will say, I'm going to just say this in totality. I think it's possible. I think it needs to be approached in a very specific manner, and it's not something that's going to be easily achieved. But I do want people to be open to the concept or the idea that this can exist. And we are having more and more research. And I will say that I'm going to continue to keep my mind open on this topic as research continues to develop, because I just went over this study. It's just from the end of 2023, and it really didn't get spotlight until a couple months ago. And so I'm sure that with this type of literature, this was a randomized control trial, which is one of the highest forms of evidence that we have in the hierarchy of evidence. I feel that this is going to spur more research labs to look into this topic, and I'm looking forward to reading more about it.
Dude, I really appreciate you sharing some of that research. I've always held the thought that it maybe is possible, but I didn't think that there was good enough research just yet out there to really show one way or the other. But it looks like we're getting down the road of being able to get some, more of the data to be able to really kind of go, yes, this really works, or no, it does not. And so it'll be interesting to see how this evolves over the next few years if they keep researching it. B, where can everybody find you at?
You guys can feel free to find me. First and foremost, the best place to ever reach me at is through my email, which is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com. And then also on social media, which preferably Instagram, which would be at Brandon DeCruz _. Jeff, where can they find you, my man?
Yeah, Instagram, Jeff Unbreakable Black. My website is jeffunbreakableblack.com if you want to purchase my copy of my book.
Yeah, hold up. I hate to interrupt you, but I finally got it, baby. So I'm
Yeah.
showing it. Anyone that's listening to the video, I can't wait to dig into this. But I actually just opened this morning. So this is Jeff's book. I'm really looking forward to it. He's put a lot into it, and I'm very much first and foremost, I'll congratulate you for the 100th time, my friend. I'm very proud
Thank you.
to see this and hold this in my hand, and also to read the nice little note that you left me. I appreciate that. And so for anyone out there, I have had some insight to Jeff's journey and his essentially his childhood and a lot of the things that he's went through and he's overcome. An incredible story to say the least, and this is why you're one of my closest friends, and I've aligned with you on many fronts. But I really do encourage, if someone wants to, I really do like motivational stories, and I know that you didn't write this in that fashion to be a motivator, but you're just being honest, raw, and real. And I think there's a lot of encouragement that any of us can get from that. So I look forward to digging into it more first and foremost. But I encourage anyone out there that wants to really hear about someone that's overcome a lot, because I've had personal conversations with you. I highly encourage you to go on his website, purchase the book, and support one of the good guys.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate that. I've gotten some good feedback on. I'll be curious to see what yours is. Some people said it's as good as Goggins Can't Hurt Me, which was very flattering to hear. But the one thing I've heard over and over and over is everybody said, damn, that was really raw. And it made them uncomfortable because I talked about everything and anything. And I think that's what we all should do more of. I think, therefore, become more tolerable of everyone's life journey because we're all here for a unique purpose. And I've always believed that. And writing that book kind of showed me that. So I was able to make some peace with myself along the way. But with that being said, man, thank you for those kinds of words. And if you guys want to get it, I autograph them for now until it goes to Amazon. But with that being said, be sure to like, share, subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to us. Show us the love. We appreciate it. We'll see you all next week. Bye.
Peace.